네, 안녕하세요. 제 목소리 들립니까? 네, 알겠습니다. 그럼 언제부터 시작할까요?
네, 교수님 잘 들리고요. 제가 간단히 교수님 소개해드리고, 네, 그리고 시작해 주시면 될 것 같습니다. 지금 저희 목소리 잘 안
네, 알았습니다.
들리시나요? 어, 잘 안 들리시나요, 목소리?
네, 이제 들립니다. 네,
네, 제가 한 짧게 3분 정도 교수님 소개해드리고요. 그 다음에
네,
해주시면 될 것 같습니다.
네.
네. Uh, Welcome to the lecture series, part of our student-directed curating architecture seminar. I'm 박신우.
안녕하십니까.
네.
안녕하십니까. 네, 안녕하세요. 이거 늦어서 미안합니다.
고생 끊어지네요.
이거 참, 걱정이 많아요. 지금 제가 서울대하고 강의를 지금 시작해야 됩니다. 근데, 이거 좀 잘 됐으면 좋겠습니다.
이거 대화는 나중에
어, 고맙습니다. 좀 기다려 주세요. 네, 네, 네. 미안합니다. 네. 미안해요. 지금 제가 베니스 한국 가면 지금 아직도 세션을 하고 있는 중이있어요. 미안해요. 아마 이 옆에 뭐 다른 혹시 소리가 많을까 싶은데 좀 양보해 주세요. 네,
네, 알겠습니다. 마저 소개 빠르게 해드리고, 네, 하겠습니다.
네, 네, 고맙습니다.
네. 네, welcome to the lecture series. I am 박신우, founder of this seminar, and thank you for joining us today. In this series, we're having more intimate conversations with Korean curators who are especially interested in architecture. And it's a great honor to be hosting Professor Kyong Park in our lecture series. For those who are not quite familiar with his background, let me introduce him briefly. Kyong Park received a Bachelor of Science in Architecture from the University of Michigan in 1978 and participated in a postgraduate independent program at the Institute of Architecture and Urban Studies in 1979. He's a co-director of the Korean Pavilion at Venice Architecture Biennale 2023, which opens tomorrow, I understand. And he's a professor at the Department of Visual Arts at the University of California, San Diego. And most notably, he was the founding director of Storefront for Art and Architecture in New York, the International Center for Urban Ecology in Detroit, and Centrala Foundation for Future Cities in Rotterdam. In Korea, he was a curator of the Gwangju Biennale 1997. He was also an artistic director and chief curator of the Anyang Public Art Project 2010. His current project is a series of collaborations under a collective called Sivichon, with an exhibition of City in a Village at Vienna Biennale for Change and Nomadic Forums Village in a City at Opsin Festival in Korea 2022. We are all looking forward to hearing more from him, so please welcome with a round of applause Professor Kyong Park.
고맙습니다. 네, 저 한국말 잘 몰라서 이 강의를 영어로 하겠습니다. 네, 미안해요. 제가 큐레이터라고 그렇게 알려져 있는데 사실은 큐레이터를 안 하고 싶어요. 오히려 저 이제 아티스트로 좀 활동을 하고 있고 건축에도 신경이 많고, 그 아시아 문화 전당에서 제가 2015년 처음 그 개막 때부터서 3년 동안의 새 정시를 한 적이 그 타이틀이 Imagining New Eurasia라고 했는데, 네. 잠깐만, Bart, is that you? No, okay. 네, 알았습니다. All right. Let me start the presentation. First, let me share the screen first. Okay. As it was mentioned already, it's this idea of ceviche started, which is combination of English and Korean. Sounds like it's a bad, civi is maybe a bad word, but CI represents city, VI represents village, chon, like me, chonnom, chonsaram. And this is the first one version of it. It was, as mentioned, it was presented at Vienna Biennale in 2018. 기억이 안 나는데 2021년. Yeah. So the title of this was City in a Village, and I collaborated with Albert Park, professor at Claremont McKenna College in Los Angeles area, and Annie Pedret, who was at the time teaching at Seoul National, and the three of us collaborated together. But the initial idea, as in most cases, many projects, is something that I started. And I started thinking about how the villages, rural area in South Korea has experienced for a long time depopulation and decay, as it is a common symptom for most national economies that has gone through urbanization, industrialization, and modernization. In particular, in South Korea, as you already know, really, 한국 사람은 52%를 굉장히 좋아하는 것 같아요. 네? Almost 52% of South Koreans live in Seoul metropolitan area now, and 52% of Koreans live in high-rise apartments, and 대한민국 인구가 52 million. So 52 is the magic number for 대한민국. And this is a pretty extreme case. Actually quite maybe similar to England, which is a part of the United Kingdom, which has about the same size territory, about 100,000 square kilometers. Population is a little bit less, but similar to South Korea, England also, much of its population lives around London metropolitan area. This concentration is, as you probably already know, is very well more.
말씀드리면 죄송한데요. 그 슬라이드가 지금 저희가 첫 페이지만 지금 보이고 있거든요.
네네, 괜찮아요. 네, 네.
네, 알겠습니다.
네. So I just wanted to explain a little bit before we start, and so I lost myself here. For South Korea, the situation is characterized as a result of the economic policies from the period of dictatorships in the past that was similar, reflective to dictatorship, which is a favor of centralization a central command. And so it favors Seoul as a result of catalog images. And the idea here was that what would be like to think about return to the villages from the city. How could that be possible? Now, as you also know, that there is a slight movement of people from the city to countryside. And interestingly, in Korea, as a Gichon and Kinong, is that perhaps unique in comparison to other countries in this kind of return to villages or rural area, is that it involves 3 generations. And of course, the older generation like me maybe wants to retire and go back home, 고향. And then the middle generation was tired of living in big city and maybe tired of working for 회사 or too much extreme amount of work. Maybe think about alternative life in rural community or return to even agriculture. But oftentimes that it fails after several years. That's the common result. And then what's interesting, however, is the young generation like you who are also thinking about the rural life as a possible option. Why? Because as you know better than me, city life is very expensive and opportunities are getting less than before. So the idea of maybe entrepreneuring out in the rural area maybe is attractive. Also because of increasing digital economy and digital nomad allows ability to work remotely, as we have seen during the coronavirus, which actually kind of normalized what was already happening before into significant factor. So these things contribute. So what we did here was to produce a kind of fictional village rather than picking an actual existing village. So we kind of generated various ideas. What you see is a model here that was
교수님,
exhibited.
죄송한데
네.
지금 슬라이드가 안 넘어가고 있습니다.
아직도
저희가 지금 시비촌 첫 페이지 커버 페이지만 지금 보이고 있거든요.
네, 그래요?
네네.
그러면 잠깐 제가 스크린을
네, 제 생각에
쉐어를
풀
잘 못하는 건
스크린 다시 쉐어하실 때
네,
PDF 말고 전체 스크린을 쉐어해 주셔야 될 것 같습니다.
네,
네, 감사합니다.
이제 보입니까? 네.
네, 잘
So
보입니다.
yeah. So and in fact so we kind of imagine a certain kind of typical idea about what village already have and what new things that it would need. And so these are examples of kind of a fold-out model because we wanted to avoid sending something for environmental and cost reason. And so I work with actually an artist in Napoli, Italy, to make this fold-out model. And then there are a series of issues that we looked at. And if you're interested, I could actually send you later a digital copy of this small catalog, which is both in Korean and English. And so these are some of the questions about the village life, about biospherical egalitarianism, post-global world. Maybe that we would return to village in post-Anthropocene life. and how to revive aging villages and slow population extinction, and how to strengthen current migration of urban dwellers to rural villages that I mentioned already. And then we had a number of ideas that we wanted to explore through discussions, which didn't actually materialize, unfortunately. But it was about how that urban and rural culture and spaces could be combined. This, in some aspect, is that how the urban culture and urban spaces would actually enter into rural villages. This is already happening, and basically following examples of young entrepreneurs who are coming from the city into villages and opening up, let's say, some kind of a boutique gift or hamburger joints or cafe and etc. As they are bringing their urban culture and urban identity to villages. Of course, currently are mostly catered to city people who are going on weekend vacation to villages, who are their main custom. But the reality is that urban culture is now beginning to enter rural environment. This is not that surprising because when the cities in the past were growing and when urbanization was happening, such to where every year there was about 400,000 people, perhaps at the highest level, moving into Seoul at times, that these people were coming from the villages and they were bringing their village culture, village identities into the city. So if the trend of movement would be reversing, that is unquestionable that city culture would go into villages. And what would be about, next question was about, is it possible to have balance and mutual relationship between human and nature? This is something that I will talk about more, and why that the exhibition that we are putting up at the Korean Pavilion now is about much of issues about is balancing relationship between us and nature. And I'll talk about more about that later. And then whether that rural community would give us an opportunity to form an alternative kind of community that are more intimate, more self-supported, and more communal, and more based on self-help, self-sufficient, than fragmented, disconnected, and isolated life that many of Korean society is experiencing more and more, not just at your generation, but even more difficult is the old retired generations of people who hang around the Tapgorgongwon area, right? And so this is exhibition view. It's a very small exhibition. And the center is the model comprised of, I think, which is 12 pieces of these little fold-out models that are put together. And then infographic on the right side that was produced by Albert Park about the history of urbanization, ruralization, and from the end of Joseon Dynasty. And then we also included some images of communities like Hongdong and Hansalim and Pulmu movements at the villages in South Korea, and two video works on the bottom right hand that about what is the comparative videos about what does urban people who live in urban culture wants to know about the rural culture, and what the rural people wants to know, or what their view about urban culture is, to understand kind of a division between urban and rural society, and perhaps their misconceptions, or let's say a conflict between urban and rural society that is one of the challenges of especially when urban migration of people into the rural community today. So additional view of the exhibition, which is a part of a large biennale. And some ideas about different ways of that today's communities interact and associate with each other, how different kinds of relationship could be formed in both urban and rural, but also in digital and virtual communities, which is connected to one of the projects that we're showing here in the Korean Pavilion from our collaboration with Gunsan-si and local a group of young architects and entrepreneurs called Udang Tang Tang, in which that the concept is based on relational communities. The community built on relations of common interest and work, and that is disconnected from actual physical location. So in other words, it's people-based community as opposed to place-based community, as increasingly people, especially the young generations, are disconnecting themselves from a particular place of identity. And because this is possible also in Korea, because Korea is small, and the transportation is very excellent and fast and affordable, so that young people, let's say, in our case studies, that many people spend, let's say, 30% in Seoul, 50% in Gunsan, and maybe 20% in Sejong, and so on. So people are able to live in 2-3 different cities at the same time. And that's what people-based community, relational-based community is about. And the first glimpse of that was here in Ceviche 1. So this, as you can see, like this is very kind of a, let's say, typical traditional rural house with a mount in the field and the trees. So this kind of idea is an exploration of what are the elements and identities in the rural community, not necessarily that we're going to design this building or this community master plan it. The only thing that we did was that we created this kind of a fictional village with a river cross, couple of bridges, and various buildings that we think that typically exist in small villages, and maybe some new buildings that represent urban conditions and kind of implanted there, and so on, and different functions are listed here. But I think that probably the most revealing is the study and illustration of these kinds of typical buildings that we find, let's say, could be hybridization of urban and rural forms of architecture, such as, 우체국, 파출소, you know, 동네 사무소 and you know, and apartment buildings and all traditional buildings and so forth. So it's kind of like a game, you know, like we could make a game with these pieces and people could play around to make a village of their own was the kind of idea, right? These are some stills from the videos by Jung Jae-kyung. So on the left side, black and white is kind of a contrast between urban and rural landscape. And on the right side, different movements for organic farming movements, and where it forms like Hansalim, for example, and also other groups that existed before, like Pulmu and Osan and others, actually has an interesting history of kind of independence movement before, let's say, unplugging yourself from contemporary, let's say, energy network, like, you know, like, but those days from 1920s, and even maybe somewhat connected and inspired with Donghak movements as well, that there were a small group of people who disconnected from the rest of the society, especially during the Japanese colonial period, where they kind of went to the villages and created organic farming and practiced educational system that was influenced by Danish rural community educational schools, and developed a kind of independent, sufficient, self-help community that is distinct and away from the colonial territories. And then they continue this kind of same idea during the dictatorship period. They remain against that political system. And so it was, in a way, kind of a passive political movement in self-isolation, you might say. Anyway, these are a number of like interviews that we made between urban and rural people about their opinions about urban people, opinions about the rural area, rural people about urban people. And you can see how the fold-out model is. It's kind of like packaged like a book, sent in a very small size, and then you unfold. And there were different artists from also from my school, as well as from Europe, and participating in some ideas, concepts. But it's too don't have much time, so I'm going to continue. So, Civichon 2 was under invitation by Obsin Festival, 2022, last year. And which is a performance festival, and but in Seoul, organized and directed by Kim Seung-in 감독님. She's known well for in previous time organized and directed Bomb Festival. I don't know if you have heard about it, remember. She was one of the first 5 directors of Asia 문화전당 in the performance theater department in 2015 as well. And So she invited me to this performance festival as a public project. And what we did was that we worked with two different cities, Mokpo and Gunsan. And in Mokpo, we collaborate with Gantaran Maul, a group that invites young people from the city to come to live and work either weekend, 1 week, or month, hoping that they would stay to live there. And they have succeeded so far, more than 30 people to become resident in Mokpo. But the most successful one was at the Gunsan city. And here's a poster for that. And it's about, again, I mentioned before, the debate between place-centered community versus people-centered community. And the whole project was called Nomadic Forms or Rich Communities. And the main part of this project was that we had this event of game, and this is the beginning of that. And an artist named Kim Wol-sik, who was one of the artists that I commissioned in Anyang Public Art Project in 2010, who worked with Ansan for decades, working with immigrant community people. And here he directed this kind of a workshop one day and asked them to make an object that represents their identity by using cardboard wrapped with plastic tapes of different colors. And then they take it and photograph that outside of the workshop. And then they bring it into the workshop later, where we made a game that is based on Monopoly, where we brought the various community representatives and owners and business people, cultural and groups, and also located in certain areas of Gunsan Center. This is basically the old center of Gunsan. Is that Wondoshi? Maybe I'm wrong, but where the colonial Japanese built area. And so it was played by a combination of local people and the young people who came from outside of Gunsan. And they played this kind of competitive game of how to occupy certain properties and businesses, how to collaborate with some people, but also compete with other people. And these are players. And it was an elimination game. But what you see on the top right-hand side, where there is there is this 3 people here, was that 윤주순, 최아림 represent 대표, 우당탕탕 대표님들. This person, as I told you, that I'm a person who doesn't remember anybody's name, including my own, was a great idea where we made them into like announcers, like in sports game, 축구 game announcers, where they make comments about how the game is going and what they're doing. And because they are from Gunsan, they know all these places. They can explain about all these different points in the game, the owners, history, and what the problem is, and so on, and so on. The last two players here, and then we made this kind of a chart that followed their movements and how that they actually, which direction they went, and what kind of relationship or conflict they begin to develop. Okay. But what it looks like is we videoed this all together, and then we showed it in later exhibition in Seoul at Sewon Sangha, Sewon Hall, and what it looks like, it's like a reality television game. And I think that there's a great potential to do this throughout Korea, going from village to villages or cities to cities, and play this kind of a game that brings people together, and to also to learn about those places in a very intimate and different way than just being a tourist. Where you go as a tourist, but you participate in this kind of a game to learn more about the people and the place, and actually engage with them in some kind of activity that might, in the end, make you to find opportunities to work and even perhaps to live there, right? So this game could be a way of a kind of a strategy in a way to connect an urban-rural environment. Okay, so we actually don't have pictures yet of the installation exhibition, but this is a general view. The blue lines on the top of the Korean pavilion and the round wall is our graphic identity that was produced by graphic designer Chris Rowe, who lives and works in Seoul. And this is, we didn't produce a presentable computer rendering. This is just our design model. And the game basically has this kind of layout. Let me just a second. I have to get another device to look at my notes because I don't have a double screen share here. Okay. So this exhibition title is called at 2086 Together How, with the question. And what is the idea behind this is that 2080 is basically, I co-directed and co-curated with Jung So-ik. And together we brought architects and community leaders and artists together to think about how we as a society, as community, might be working together to endure current and future environmental crisis until 2086, the year when global population is supposed to reach its peak. The premise for this project is to interrogate our Faustian ideology of progress. What I mean is Faust is someone, it's an old German story. You probably know, but I explain anyway. Faust was, he made a pact with the devil to live forever or something like that. I can't remember exactly, but then basically got into a lot of trouble. The ideology of progress, which has driven us since, in my opinion, 1492, when Columbus reached America, is that we have gotten into idea of unlimited material pleasure. through industrialization, westernization, and liberalism. And our preparation of the past colonial exploitation was the first step, is the first step in our reconciliation with nature. And I'll explain what that means later. Central, what I mean by how we have to come to terms with our past colonial exploitation. Now, in the case of Korea, we were the victims of colonial exploitation, not the benefit, the benefit, the one that benefited from. Central to the exhibition is the game of Together How, as you can see at the center here, which is on the right side. There's a wall and the monitor, 5 monitor on top. This is a quiz show, like a television quiz show, where we invite visitors to play a game on a climate end game, meaning that whether we're going to survive or we're all going to die, sometime in the near future. By asking to respond questions on social political issues from various fictional characters who would appear on the screen here, throwing a question with 3 possible answers, you can press these 3 buttons to make your choices. And the answers would be, these are all fictional characters. Like some of them is like, let's say, Minister of Temple of Love, because we feel there's not enough love in the world, right now. Or like, let's say, a Church of Gross Domestic Product, where what I'm saying is that our most popular religion, what we believe in today, is not Christian, Islam, or Buddhism, but it is actually gross domestic product. And so when they answer their questions, it would light up on the screen on the right side here on 420 colored lights, and then also illuminates this text in the front that are 44 questions that ties the climate endgame with the history of progress that brought us to the climate endgame. And then the score would be kept every day, and it will be presented on our website and Instagram. But it would also, with our top secret algorithm, produced in collaboration with Elon Musk. I'm just kidding. He really did not collaborate with us, right? And that represent global carbon dioxide level, global temperature, sea level, refugee migration, level of consumption, availability of water, and Gini coefficient and such, that would actually go onto this 7 blackboards here that would be handwritten. The number statistics from 2023 to 2086 every year during the 6-month duration of this exhibition. And then I would write periodic reports about what's happening in 2000, let's say 50, that, let's say, for example, Venice was underwater, right? And where did these people go? And so on. Here's the blackboard, right? No numbers right now. And then together with the game, there were 3 collaborations between architects and community activists focusing on urban-rural conditions in South Korea. And this is Gunsan City, where SOA, Society of Architecture, collaborate with the Udangtangtang I mentioned in Gunsan, and who are young group of people revitalizing city's old market and hosting local culture based on guerrilla events to explore contemporary nomads if they could survive and revive local legacy and communities like business identity products. And they're designed for so-called destructive creation, which is a reversal of the famous term that represents high capitalism, the creative destruction, as a term that first spoken by Austrian economist Joseph Schumpeter, I think it was around late 1950s, that introduced basically, but SOA is looking at opposite direction. Creative destruction basically means that capitalism must destroy in order to build. So 재개발, for example, would be a perfect example of creative destruction. Okay, 재개발, as you know, is built on area of decay, but that area of decay, once it's assigned as 재개발 district, it starts to decay rapidly because nobody takes care of it, right? Because it's going to be redeveloped in 10 years from now or something like that. So it creates a kind of induced deterioration. And that's the creative destruction. And then once that is destroyed, you build something completely new. But however, from the day that it is completed, the new construction completed, then it starts to decay to the next step of creative destruction, of redeveloping older apartment, building higher apartments. Well, maybe not, because, you know, we're not going to have that many people anymore. Our population is not growing. And so that their idea was to, they took a house down, an old Japanese house, and they brought part of it, mostly the roof part, to here in Venice and reconstructed. And they're putting installation of video projections inside. These are some of the houses that are abandoned in Gunsan. And they demolished this house that you see here. And they developed these, they did a DIT workshop for making tools. DIT, as opposed to do it yourself, DIY, is about doing it together, meaning that you work together as opposed to working alone by yourself, to create a kind of a community activity. And these are tools that they made themselves between SOA and Udangtangtang workshop, were tools that regenerate old, abandoned, unused tools, and make tools that it takes more than one person to use them. And as you can see in the picture here below. So that the idea that also even just the using tool requires collaboration between people. I don't know why this picture is crooked, but within this installation, they would put their tools, different publications and researchers, and these drawers with different artifacts that they have captured or in their research. And then this project is a video project that green screen, but I'll tell you a little bit later. First, on the left side, I'm sorry. Oh, okay. First, the 3-channel video project is by an artist named Jung Jae-kyung, whose a title called A Future, and it's a video project about a fictional child God, a child who's here in this picture, who is born, a little baby, who cannot hear, see, or taste, or feel anything, has no sensations, but has the ability to see the future, about the future of the climate change, about whether we're going to survive or we're not going to survive. So this child becomes incredible, let's say, fascinating for the Korean society. And there's a great debate about her ability and what she sees in the future, and whether it's true or not. So there's people who support it, people who's against her, and it creates a huge kind of a division and conflict in society. However, that she has become so important because she can predict the future, that there is like exhibitions, performances, musics about her, and there are billion views about her every day in internet. And she becomes a superstar, a super icon. And she brings both admiration and fear among the public and officials. So they're trying to figure out what kind of images that she is seeing, and this becomes, a major government research project. The other project is called Ruin as Future, Future as Ruin, by Urban Terrain Labs, led by Seo Yeon, based in New York City, working with an activist organization called Space Beam in Dong-incheon, with its Min Un-gi 대표님, and they are historic community of Daedari in Dong-incheon, and they have actually organized to stop completion of a major highway that destroyed much of its community. And their resistance have raised urgent questions about the future between post-Anthropocene and Neo-Holocene life. This installation will present evolution of the city of Incheon, including its past enlargement into the ocean, and possibly return of original shoreline under rising sea level, the return of that burn. The circular installation present history of Daedari, is made of fragmented collage of 2 large panoramic paintings by Dong-incheon artists, like these images. And this is kind of a pictorial drawing of the area that they stopped the highway construction. now it remains at this kind of natural conditions in which that they're uh, played like a natural park, a playground here. So in a way, it's like bringing rural condition into urban center. The next project is making nomad communities by an architect group called NHDM and investigating spatial temporal landscapes about the immigrant workers in rural communities around Ansan City. And that is exploring the idea of transcultural lateral coexistence between national and religious borders. They made 6 collages. One of them is actually, this is the wrong one. This is actually urban terrain work before. Sorry. These are urban terrain work, Dongincheon work. For example, this is how that Incheon could be under sea, or it could be a picture above is that either there'll be a floating city to develop, or that the city would go under the water and original shoreline would come back, and Incheon Airport would be now under the sea. This is kind of an image of that idea. And you can see the Getper is coming back with people, you know, on it, looking for seafood. And they'll be presented, installed here, which includes some of the wonderful drawings that I don't have images of, about like a building, a fictional building in Ansan. What was the, hold on a second. Wangordong, like a Doshiwon building, and where like all these immigrant laborers live in. And then also there was, now this is NHDM, I'm sorry to confuse you, but they did a lot of interviews of the immigrant workers, and they wrote in, some of them wrote them in Korean that they have learned in order to come to work here. Others written in their own languages like Arabics and other languages, and various questions about their life in Korea. And then 6 collages about different future scenarios of the village areas in Ansan and Gyeonggi-do, where it's a combination of, like for instance here, number 4 train that goes from Seoul to Wolgok-dong and Ansan-si is often full of immigrants, and there that they become kind of a, during the travel becomes a meeting place for all different cultures inside the train, like for example, like a big long table where they can sit together and share different food of their own culture. This is a vinyl house where many of these people live together in a very bad condition, a kind of an imaginary view of that. And then artist Kim Won-sik, who I showed you before, who did the workshop at Gunsan Forum, is creating a work called Community of Difference, where in the movements created by immigrant workers, there's a kind of emergence of idea of existence of shamans that represent their movements, and that these shamans follow sun, hide from the wind, and they created kind of a practice and ritual that immigrants begins to follow. And the shamans could be like in these pictures. This is only the same picture, but they're actually 6 different pictures. Some are represented, let's say, top idol animals like bears and tigers and lions that maybe represent Korean landscape or the landscape from where these people are from, or just even simple objects like desk or stones that people start to think that they resemble God, and then underneath a blue box is actually a suitcase that opens up, and out comes a vinyl house in which that people can sleep, like this, George. This is one of the shaman images, and these are made from pixel words that contain the identity of, let's say, such a person. And one of them will be actually a digital animated. I think this one's digital animated. And this is the logo of the project. Okay, I think these are the titles. We also did collaboration with eFlux, which is one of the most important art and architectural digital journal based in New York and in Germany. And we invited 3 international writers and 3 Korean writers to write about future mythology. And this will be, I think its first issue is the 3 issues start to be published from this week. So if you check into eFlux, I think you will find them. And then they are actually all in our catalog that will be here. Okay, now I have a whole other presentation about my philosophy, which is kind of a lecture, but I don't think that we have enough time for that, right? So we're gonna stop the lecture here, and I will take your questions and answers. 이렇게 하면 되겠습니까? 괜찮아요?
네, 저희 질문이랑 이제 Q&A 세션이 있을 예정인데 저희 교수님 혹시 시간 어느 정도 있으실까요?
한 20분.
저희 교수님, 저희가 Q&A 세션보다도 그 지금 그 열어놓은 슬라이드 있으시잖아요. 교수님의 미국 전시 관련된 이거를 저희가 혹시 간략하게 좀 설명을 들을 수 있을까요? Maybe 10-15 minutes.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Let me read it. Yeah. Okay, I'll do that. Yeah.
감사합니다.
네. 쳐다봐야죠. Okay. Oh, this is not. I just come to those. Yes. The pictures that you see is basically all the pictures that I took. Most of them are actually from iPhone pictures over the years. The premise of this exhibition is to wonder why we are so isolated when we are supposed to be so connected through globalization of information, finance, and even culture. And 그리고 또 these are the questions that, you know, the game that I told you about in the Korean Pavilion? These are the questions that these fictional character asks the players. And then these are the choices that they have to make. For example, this kind of very racist organization, where now Tammuz is this person is the original leader of the replacement movement that is known for anti-immigration to foreign workers in Europe, and also connected with eugenics during the Nazi period, and also in America before Jim Crow movement. And it's tied together with Darwinian ideas, right? So I read this one and then I read my other. Our great replacement is now turning into great displacement. Our cities that we leave behind as we move to better climates are taken by wretched colored people. How can we keep them from destroying our great Teutonic heritage? That Teutonic heritage is the idea of Nazis thinking that white people are superior, and the German was the great ideal leader, and Teutonic heritage was when before the medieval time, they believed this is where the German people came from. So the question here is, you have a choice. Okay, build a city to keep them out, or destroy our city so that barbarians cannot move in. Or they can stay in our city if they maintain them until we come back. So based on these choices, we would have scores. 알겠습니까? 네, 고맙습니다. 그러면은 I'll go back to my reading and so why are we so insecure about our future when so many of us are living at unprecedented level of wealth, consumption, and freedom? Why then is the idea of progress taking us closer to extinction than to our perfection that it promised? These questions together wonder how and when did the climate endgame begin? Allow me to speculate that this could be around 1492, the year when Columbus landed in America and when Reconquista was completed on the Iberian Peninsula, which is Spain and Portugal. This was the beginning of the rise of Western Europe and later the West that has come to define and dominate the way of life for many of us on this planet, including other forms of life, animate or inanimate. But how could 90 men on 3 pitiful ships would lead to command all the oceans of the world within half a century? Was this when Christian world took a small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind, which is actually the word that was used by first landing on the moon, and begin to dominate the world and its nature to start Anthropocene. Is the Great North American Garbage Patch that float? I'm sorry. Is it the floating graveyard to the gyre, which is the movement of ocean currents, that allowed Columbus to reach America, and the triangular trade of slaves, cotton, textile that helped to make Western colonial imperialism? Setting up the globalizing chain of production, consumption, and waste was then 1492, the year when we truly became the slayer or destroyer of the earth, no longer its caretaker. What about the third of 150,000 tons of silver and gold that Spanish Empire extracted from the mountains of Peru and Mexico that were used to pay for its trade deficit with China? So you can see that trade deficit of China is not just now, but it's old historical legacy. Queen Elizabeth I, not the one that recently died, which is II, used 3/4 of her profit from 4,700% return profit by the pirate slave trader Sir Francis Drake to clear England's entire foreign debt. The British East India Company's opium trade under Queen Victoria helped to pay for British trade deficits with China once again. Were they set forth by the same giant that produced the Great North Pacific Garbage Patch, which, by the way, is 5 times bigger than Daehanmingung, a dirty laundry of history that has never been washed. Economist Utusha Patnaik calculated that Britain extracted about $45 trillion from India from 1765 to 1938. That is more than 17 times the annual GDP of United Kingdom today. This is on top of tens of millions, perhaps even hundreds of millions of South Asians who worked unpaid or underpaid to make the British people more prosperous. What about the 4.2 million South Asians who served in British India Army to defend Britain in both world wars? Were they compensated equally as the English soldiers? What about the destruction of the South Asian textile industries by British empires, which gave birth of Industrial Revolution to England instead of in India? The environmental crisis, therefore, is not just about recent or upcoming destructions. It has significant history already. To apply an equal level of ecological responsibility to the newly and historically polluting nations altogether is asking the former to forget centuries of industrial, agricultural, and technological pollutions by their colonial masters. This is nothing less than extending the privilege of colonial era into the environmental era, akin to so many industrial and energy companies that leaves their pollutions behind to local communities after they relocate or close down. It is as if the British Raj, which is the British colonial government, donated its environmental destruction to the people of South Asia as its parting gift for their independence. The future of climate remediation is absolutely bound to the past colonial exploitation. But we're the profiteers of colonial and environmental legacy, the consumers of the empire's progress pay back what they owe. They are barely aware of their legacy of environmental destruction in distant lands and distant times, when they're even mostly unaware of such in their own land and time. What is the statute of limitation, that's a legal term, on bringing past ecological devastation into a trial as a crime against humanity and nature? Higher population, higher production, higher consumptions are the triad of progress. Everything must be more and upward in the growth forever economy. In this much happier feedback between human and nature than the mortality inferring Malthusian catastrophe. Malthus was the one who predicted in late 1700 that the population explosion would produce climate catastrophe. Its nature then must be sacrificed to the creative destruction so that our prosperous life can continue. The idea of progress is the most spectacular power that the West has brought to the destruction of our planet. But can this be continued? Does it have the end? The Grand Master of the Temple of GDP, gross domestic product, that is, may have been Edward Louis Bernays, aka the father of public relations, effectively translating libidinal desire of his famous double uncle Sigmund Freud into mass consumption. He revolutionized capitalism of necessity into capitalism of desires. He turned perhaps all of us into Pavlov's dog, which is a famous scientific experiment where that is like mind control, where alters behavior of dogs to automated command. I'm using that as a term to describe that we also have become that to consumer products. That we have all become the Pavlov's dog running loose in a town-side shopping malls where we could unleash our stratospheric desire that could never be satisfied in the cold, windowless suburban Eden for the national wealth. Yes, we are told to recycle and reduce pollution and so on, but few are brave enough to stand up against the freedom of consumer choice, our most popular form of democracy. We want to convert our cars into electric, but we are unwilling to make them smaller or buy less. It is completely patriotic to buy and buy and waste and waste. After all, we are no longer citizens. We are just tracked consumers to further income inequality. But such consumptuous happiness is not for everyone, because we are not all equal in this wonderful world of voodoo capitalism and autocracy. I fear that the climate change will continue to favor the dominant race, economy, and even geography, as we have previewed this in We Were Not All in This Together, Coronavirus 19. Many nations in the global south, along with the other developing nations elsewhere, are conscripted to the front line of the storming environmental crisis. 잠깐만요. Tell them to read the text of the exhibition concept instead. Then I wonder how racism, colonialism, which were deeply sown into nature and us, would react to the condition of regression when scarcity, not plenty, becomes the rule of our future. So after surviving what was known as MAD, M-A-D, which is the mutually assured destruction in the Cold War, are we about to enter SAD, S-A-D, the self-assured destruction? In a race against time, Celsius, meters, NRR, TFR, ppm, ppt, MWH, KWA, and the most important, percentage have become the tarot cards for our destiny. But they are scapegoats to create a grand fantasy that the problems of the environment are all out there. No, but they are deep within us. We need to fix our broken self as a civilization, and only then can we reconcile with nature. But are we capable of such self-correction? Did the idea of progress in making us to look only forward strip from us the ability to be reflective? Is the era of controlling future not only that of nature, but also of our own, is now coming to an end? If so, then who will control our future in the future? I say it will be history. 사진이 다 없어졌습니다. 다 떨어졌어요. 조금 남았습니다. 좀 기다려주세요. I say it will be history that will control our future, but it's not our history. History which we always thought was about us and written by us now wants to liberate from us. Why? Because like nature, it fears its own distinction along with everything else that encounter us humans. History now wants to be self-determined and no longer be the necropolis or the graveyard for our great deeds. The real universal history is not Turgot's liberalism, which is the French so-called founder of liberalism, is the one that will put our history on trial for crime against humanity and nature. It wants to know how in the hell we came up with the climate engine. So the premise of the project 2086 Together How question mark, which will be presented in Korean Pavilion in the Venice Architectural Biennale of 2026, is to wish to interrogate our Faustian ideology of progress and how we have come to seek unlimited material pleasure through industrialization, colonization, and globalization. The exhibition will assert that not only will the environmental crisis would force us to invent a better eco-cultural paradigm, and I say eco-cultural, not biocultural, because bioculture is still an anthropocentric term, that it would be our best and perhaps even our last chance to become a better humanity. Together, how, therefore, is the question that will take us to the year when our global population is supposed to peak. But remember, the crisis is not in the environment. It is us who is the crisis. Thank you. 고맙습니다. 감사합니다. 네, 이제 강의를 끝 해도 되죠?
네, 이제 저희가 따로 지금 사전에 Q&A 질문이 있는지 확인했는데 저희가
네.
따로 있진 않은 것 같아서 이걸로 마무리해도
네.
괜찮을 것 같습니다.
네, 고맙습니다. 네,
네, 감사합니다, 교수님.
네, 네, 안녕히 계십시오. 네, 저녁
수고하십시오.
맛있게 잡수세요. 네.
네, 감사합니다.